It's the worst possible thing that could ever happen.
Why do people behave the way they do online?
We're dealing with really nasty abuse.
This is the story told by the presidents and prime ministers who lived through it.
Volodymyr Zelensky, very philosophical, then very clever.
Only on the BBC. Watch on iPlayer, listen on Sounds.
Now on BBC Two, the latest news.
Live from London, this is BBC News. 4 gunmen accused of carrying out the Moscow concert hall attack are charged with terrorism. Intense fighting is reported around 3 hospitals in Gaza. Aid agencies say dozens of doctors and patients are displaced or detained.
Firebomb 293 at 165 knots of word.
As Houthi attacks in the Red Sea continue, we gain first access on board a Royal Navy warship. And American comedian Kevin Hart is honoured for a Lifetime Achievement Award in comedy. Hello and welcome, I'm Samantha Simmonds. We begin in Russia, where authorities have charged 4 men, it says, attacked a Moscow concert hall and killed at least 137 people. 3 of them were marched bent double into a Moscow court, while the 4th was in a wheelchair. All were charged with committing an act of terrorism. They've been ordered into custody pending a trial in May. Media reports have named all 4 men, saying they are nationals of Tajikistan. 3 have reportedly pleaded guilty. These live pictures show the tributes to the victims placed outside the concert hall. The Islamic State group says it carried out the attack and it's uploaded graphic videos of it. Anna Aslam reports.
Handcuffed and blindfolded, 4 suspected gunmen were brought into court. They all appeared injured. One man arrived in a wheelchair and sat in the dock with his eyes closed throughout the proceedings. All were charged with committing an act of terrorism. The 4 men are reportedly Tajikistan nationals. Russia says they were caught fleeing to Ukraine and had contacts there. Kyiv fiercely denies any link to the attack. The Islamic State group says it was behind the shooting. This is how the attack had begun, with gunmen in the foyer and desperate attempts to take cover. The attackers moved on to the auditorium. By the end of this, more than 130 people were dead. Across Russia, flags flew at half-mast for the victims of the concert hall attack. And at the scene of the attack, Crocus City Hall, the crowds grew longer on a national day of mourning, an outpouring of sympathy, a mountain of tributes to the dead. As President Putin lit a candle for the victims, Russia will be praying there will be no more attacks. Anna Aslam, BBC News.
And we'll be going live to our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, in Moscow in a few minutes' time. A reminder, though, you can get much more on the aftermath of the Russia attack online, including this article from Steve Rosenberg looking at how President Putin has been reacting. You can find that at bbc.com/news or on the BBC News app. Well, France has raised its terror threat warning to the highest level following the Islamic State group claiming responsibility for the deadly attack in Russia. It allows for exceptional security measures such as extra patrols by armed forces in public places like train stations, airports and religious sites. The country had lowered the level in January, with this escalation back to the highest level coming months before the Paris Olympics later on this year. To the Middle East now, and the Palestinian Red Crescent says Israeli troops have been firing smoke bombs around a hospital in Khan Yunis in Gaza to try to force staff, patients and displaced people to leave. These images from this morning show the skyline looking over southern Gaza in the direction of Khan Yunis. You can see the plumes of smoke from airstrikes. The Israel Defense Forces also released this video of strikes over Khan Yunis. It says they are targeting what it calls Hamas infrastructure there. Further north, medics say 10 people have been killed at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, and dozens of doctors and patients have been detained. A week of fighting is continuing at the territory's largest hospital, where Israel says it's captured 500 Hamas and Islamic Jihad members. IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari gave this briefing on the operation there.
170 terrorists were neutralized in or around the Shifa hospital compound while firing at our forces. The IDF apprehended hundreds of terror suspects with confirmed ties to Hamas or Islamic Jihad, making this one of the most successful operations since the start of the war.
Well, the UN Security Council is set to vote on a new draft resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire and the unconditional release of all hostages. The Secretary-General is in Jordan. He had this message on a potential ceasefire.
So I see a growing consensus emerging international community to tell the Israelis that the ceasefire is needed. And I also see a growing consensus. I heard it in the US, I heard it from the European Union, not to mention, of course, the Muslim world, a growing consensus to tell clearly to the Israelis that any ground invasion of Rafah could mean a catastrophic humanitarian disaster. And I strongly hope that this consensus that is emerging in the whole of the international community will make Israel reflect and avoid what could be a dramatic tragedy.
Let's speak to our Middle East correspondent, Yilan now, who is following all the developments from Jerusalem. Yilan, good to see you. First of all, let's start with the continuing Israeli operation around a number of hospitals in Gaza. What more do we know?
So there are 3 hospitals that are affected, 2 of them in the south, Al-Amal and Nasser hospitals in Khan Yunis. And then you have the Israeli operation that's been going on for 1 week now at Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. That is Gaza's biggest medical complex. Now, the Palestinian Red Crescent says that in Al-Amal hospital, the Israeli troops have moved back in there, tanks have advanced. It's talked about how one of its medics has been killed in the past couple of days, that also a displaced person who was in the hospital grounds was shot and killed, and says that the Israeli military has ordered people, whether they're medics, patients or displaced people, out of the hospital grounds and has been using smoke bombs to try to drive them out. The Israeli military has not commented directly on that, but it says that Hamas has been using civilian infrastructure in that area, and that is what it's acting on. This has been a consistent claim from the Israeli military that Hamas uses civilian sites, particularly hospitals, and has fighters based there. Hamas and medics have been denying that. When it comes to Shifa hospital, in the latest statements, the Israeli military spokesman was talking about how there were gunmen, he said, based in the emergency and maternity wards at Shifa hospital who had been shooting. We have also heard there that something like 800 people have been detained. Now, Palestinians are saying that there are many innocent people who have been detained, as well as 5 patients who they say were killed. That's according to the Hamas-run authorities, and also 5 doctors killed in the ongoing operations there. For the Israeli military, this is a major operation. As we heard, they're calling it one of the most successful and important of the war so far.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Yilan, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is heading to Washington, isn't he? This comes after the Vice President Kamala Harris said that it would be a huge mistake to move into Rafah with any type of military operation there. Tell us more about what's expected from his visit.
Yeah, so this comes at a time when US-Israel relations are really strained. The defense minister will be asking for continued US military assistance to keep fighting the war in Gaza, and also to prepare, we understand, for any possible escalation with the powerful armed group Hezbollah in Lebanon. But he's going to come repeatedly from different American officials at his meeting under criticism for these Israeli plans for a full-scale military offensive in Rafah, in the very south of the Gaza Strip. That's where you have about 1.5 million people crammed up along the border with Egypt, mostly displaced by the fighting, with deteriorating conditions in that area. Now, Kamala Harris has come out with some of the strongest comments yet and said that the White House is ruling out nothing if Israel doesn't heed American concerns about all of this and continues with its plan to go into Rafah. We've had the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking last night on the Purim Jewish holiday, and he still sounded adamant that Israel is considering this offensive to go after Hamas battalions that it says are in the Rafah area. He said it's impossible to defeat the sheer evil, meaning Hamas, by leaving it intact in Rafah. We will enter Rafah and achieve total victory.
OK, let's just listen to what Kamala Harris, the US Vice President, had to say.
We have been clear in multiple conversations and in every way that any major military operation in Rafah would be a huge mistake. Let me tell you something. I have studied the maps. There's nowhere for those folks to go.
Well, meanwhile, Yolande, talks continue in Qatar around a possible ceasefire deal, hostage release. What more do we know about what's going on there?
Yeah, so these indirect talks are going on between Israel and Hamas in Doha. You have the Qataris involved, the Egyptians and the US as well. And we understand that in the past couple of days, the Americans have come up with a new proposal to help overcome one of the sticking points in the talks, which is about the number of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails that would be released in return for for some of the Israeli hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza. We're not getting any signs of a breakthrough in those talks at the moment. We're told that they're waiting for Hamas to give its response to that latest proposal. And there's some reports also that Israel has softened its stance when it comes to another Hamas demand, which is that displaced people should be allowed to return to their homes in the north, and is now saying in these talks, although this is not official, that some of those displaced people will be allowed to return to the north of the Gaza Strip.
OK, Yolande, thank you. Let's go back to our top story now. Authorities in Russia have charged 4 men, it says, attacked a Moscow concert hall and killed at least 137 people. Let's go live to Moscow and talk to our correspondent there, Steve Rosenberg. Steve, good to see you. Those 4 men have appeared in court in the last couple of hours. Tell us more about what happened in that court appearance and what we know about these men.
Yeah, it was a late night court appearance yesterday, and the 4 men were brought in. They were charged with an act of terrorism. They were remanded in custody for 2 months. They are reported to be citizens of the Central Asian Republic of Tajikistan, that's according to the Russian TASS agency. From their appearance, it looked as if they'd been beaten. Black eyes, swollen face. One of the men was brought into the courtroom in a wheelchair, in a hospital gown, and at one point looked as if he was going to lose consciousness. As for the casualty figures, the latest, 137 people were killed in that brutal attack on the concert hall on Friday, but officials are warning that may not be the final death toll. The figures could rise.
And Steve, what's more about the government response? Initially, Vladimir Putin came out very quickly to blame Ukraine, despite Islamic State claiming responsibility. What's the latest from the government?
Well, Russian officials and the pro-Kremlin media continue to promote the notion that in some way, somehow, Ukraine was behind this. Yes, Vladimir Putin suggested that in his TV address at the weekend. I'll tell you, there's some extraordinary commentary in the pro-Kremlin newspapers this morning. One of them says, there are plenty of reasons for thinking Kiev did this. There are basic truths. Fire burns, wind blows, the Kiev regime are murderers and terrorists, presenting no evidence at all, but coming out with something like that. And another paper, comes from Moscow Pravda, quotes a Russian MP as saying, the best and only response to this will be our victory. We simply must take Kiev and crush this terrorist beast. So you get the feeling that Moscow is trying to use the devastating attack on the Crocus City concert hall as an excuse, as a pretext to escalate its war in Ukraine.
Yeah, and Steve, we're just looking at pictures of people continuing to lay flowers outside the concert hall. What has the public reaction been? Obviously an outpouring of grief, but kind of in response to these claims by the government that Ukraine had something to do with this.
It's interesting. I was there yesterday. I was talking to people outside Crocus City Hall. There were lots of people. It was the National Day of Mourning yesterday, and huge crowds had come out to lay flowers at this makeshift shrine by the side of the building. And I was asking people, what did they think? Who was behind this? Most people hadn't come to a conclusion. they were still very much in shock at what had happened on Friday. So many people killed. And there was a sense, if not of fear, but certainly of deep concern about the possibility of another attack. I think that's what's worrying people.
OK, Steve in Moscow, thank you for updating us. And a reminder, you can get, of course, much more on the aftermath of that Russia attack online, including this article from Steve Rosenberg, looking at how President Putin will react. You can find that at bbc.com/news or on the BBC News app. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Over the past couple of years, net migration to the UK has hit record levels despite a Over the past couple of years, net migration to the UK has hit record levels despite a pledge by the government to reduce the numbers of people arriving in the wake of the Brexit referendum. Now, months after leaving her post, the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has accused Rishi Sunak of not taking the issue seriously enough. Here's our analysis editor, Ross Atkins.
Net migration reached record levels in 2022 and 2023. That's the difference between the number of people arriving and leaving. And when the government talks about immigration, one issue dominates.
One of my top priorities as Prime Minister is to stop the boats.
You might have got the impression that it's small boats that have driven a record rise in net migration.
They haven't. While the issue's important, in the context of overall immigration, the numbers are tiny.
Last year, almost 30,000 people arrived by small boats. Also last year, the government issued 1.4 million visas for people to come to the UK legally. And at that time, Suella Braverman was Home Secretary, until Rishi Sunak sacked her in November. She now says the Prime Minister had not necessarily assumed that legal migration was an important issue for the British people. And she makes this claim.
I struggled myself as Home Secretary to even have a meaningful conversation with him about it. I was left to written correspondence on several occasions throughout a period of 12 months, putting forward policy proposals, but he refused to talk to me.
Number 10 declined to comment on this. In 2019, the Conservatives committed to reducing immigration, and despite a new visa system introduced after Brexit, the opposite happened. Professor Brian Bell is chair of the government's Independent Migration Advisory Committee.
We've offered humanitarian schemes to the Ukraine and Hong Kong citizens. We've increased the number of international students, and we've increased the number of workers, particularly in the health and social care sector. They are all the result of deliberate policy by the government.
Yeah, so bought the place in 2002.
Many in the care sector welcomed the government's decisions, including Raj Siegel.
If we didn't have international recruitment, we didn't have the staff that we've got, I think we would probably be closed by now.
Now we want to go back.
Last year, though, the government announced measures to cut net migration, including that care workers and most postgraduate students can no longer bring dependents. Despite this change of tack, the government insists its approach is right, including on small boats.
It's right that we place an emphasis on that, but that is not at the expense of also getting on and delivering on the mission around legal migration, which is to get a better balance, to bring those numbers down.
Labour declined our interview request, but says net migration needs to come down and that a practical plan to tackle skills shortages is needed. Net migration is expected to fall, but only from a record high that was the consequence of the government's own decisions. Ros Atkins, BBC News.
To Senegal now, where supporters of the main opposition candidate in the African country's presidential election have been celebrating as provisional results show him in the lead. Bassirou Diomaye Faye is ahead of the former Prime Minister Amadou Ba. Several other opposition figures have now conceded. Let's get the latest from the BBC's Thomas Nardi, who joins us now from Accra. Welcome to you, Thomas. Bring us up to date.
Well, opposition candidate Diomaye Faye has been on the lead as a result of provisional results announced on television, and his supporters have been out on the streets here in Sali, where I am at the moment, in the capital Dakar and other parts of the country, because they believe they are winning this election. His opponent Amadou Ba of the ruling coalition has said that he's expecting a runoff. The winner of this election will have to secure 50% of the votes, and the Electoral Commission has until Friday to declare the final results. As you mentioned earlier, some of the opposition candidates have already called opposition leader Diomaye Faye to congratulate him.
And what are we expecting to happen next, Thomas?
And so the results have started trickling in. The ones that have come are not official results yet. They are just collations done by various television stations and then the political parties themselves. The Electoral Commission is still trying to compile all the results from the various polling stations and then declare them. So what we are seeing now is that a lot of people believe the opposition candidate will win this election, and that is why his supporters are celebrating.
OK, Thomas, for now, thank you. I just want to bring you some new lines coming out from Russia following this deadly attack on Friday by its so-called Islamic State, who've claimed responsibility, in which more than 130 people were killed. Well, we're hearing from the Kremlin now that they said if asked if such a deadly attack is a failure of Russian special services, the Kremlin says no country is immune from terrorism. They said the fight against terrorism demands international cooperation on public discussion around the death penalty, some saying that the 4 people, if found guilty of this, who were arrested and have been charged with this attack, some claiming they should face the death penalty, the country should bring it back. They said, we are not taking part in such discussions at the moment. When asked about the treatment of the detained suspects, including bruising, beating, they said, we are leaving this question unanswered. And they were also asked about US warnings of an attack in Moscow, which we understand the US had some intelligence around this and shared that. The Kremlin said our special services work independently. They said it's not appropriate to comment on the investigation. They said President Putin will have a meeting today on Monday about measures taken after the concert attack. So lots of new information coming in from the Kremlin. They're saying that foreign leaders have spoken to Putin about his intentions to improve bilateral cooperation to counter terrorism. They said in the current period of serious confrontation, there is little international cooperation on fighting terrorism. So lots of new lines coming in. And as you can see, many people continuing to visit the site outside the concert hall, which was attacked, and more than 130 people were killed. The American comedian Kevin Hart has been honoured with a Lifetime Achievement Award in comedy. The 44-year-old became only the 25th recipient of the Mark Twain Prize for American Humour. Adam Sandler, Whoopi Goldberg and Jon Stewart are among the previous winners. Hart said it was amazing to be in such company.
After, you've been a part of a night that will be historic and something that you will be able to revert back to forever, then it settles in. I think for now it's more about just slowly embracing it and just realizing the importance of relationships. That's the thing that I highlight the most in this moment, the value of relationships, the value of friendships. And on a night like this, to be acknowledged and supported by people that you truly do love and that you truly do operate with.
Well, one of the comedians to pay tribute to Kevin Hart during the event was Jerry Seinfeld.
How did he get that perfect name? Is that his real name? It's unbelievable. The fit of that guy with that name, it's crazy. His first name's Kevin. Every Kevin's always a great guy. And then Hart. He's the most likable human in world history, and his last name is Hart? Come on, it's insane. If he wanted to change his name for show business, he'd have to make it Kevin Irresistible. It's the only way you could improve it.
Just before we go, let's show you the scene live in Jordan where the UN Secretary-General is visiting. This is Antonio Guterres. He has been holding talks there, and we are waiting to hear what he has to say. He has already said that there is growing international consensus to tell Israel that a ceasefire is needed and that an assault on Rafah would cause a humanitarian disaster. The UN Security Council are set to vote today on Monday on a new draft resolution on an immediate ceasefire in Gaza after Russia and China vetoed an earlier text which was proposed by the United States a few days ago. Let's just listen in.
Ongoing devastation in Gaza, as well as rising violence in the occupied West Bank. I commend Jordan for your support for de-escalation, including particularly your very important role in East Jerusalem. And I salute Jordan for your relentless effort to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza, including through the personal efforts and wisdom.
OK, we'll continue to listen to that and bringing you any news updates from that news conference. Do stay with us here on BBC News. We'll be back very shortly.
Hello again. The weather this week is certainly going to be changeable. We'll often have windy conditions, we'll see spells of rain, and tonight in particular we're looking at some significant snow on the Scottish Hills, which could lead to some disruption on some of the higher routes. So in terms of the rainfall, you can see here how much we're expecting in the next 5 days. The lighter greens, the key here, up to 80 millimetres of rainfall is possible in parts of southwest England. And what we have at the moment is this band of rain pushing northwards, bumping into the cold air in Scotland, so some snow on the hills, and then this next weather front bringing in some further rain later. In between, quite a lot of cloud around with a scattering of snow showers in the north. Here we've got temperatures of 5 to 7. Come further south, we're looking at 10 to 12 and breezy through the Irish Sea. So this is our weather front moving northwards as we go through the evening and overnight. Some persistent rain with it, but on higher ground we'll also see that significant snowfall. In fact, above 300 metres or so, we could have 10 to 20 centimetres of snow. At lower levels, it's more likely to be rain and sleet. That's at sea level. So as we go through the course of this evening and overnight, we've got our weather front producing the rain and the snow. Come south, we've got our other weather front producing some rain. We'll see some clear spells, but there will be quite a bit of cloud around. So for England, Wales and Northern Ireland, our overnight lows between 5 and 7. Colder in Scotland with temperatures closer to freezing or just below. Tomorrow, a lot of that snow will eventually start to peter out. It's going to be windy in the north. There'll be quite a bit of dry weather, but our weather front still slowly pushing northeastwards through the course of the day. Temperatures 5 to 11 degrees. And then as we head on into Wednesday, another area of low pressure comes in from the Atlantic. Windy across southern counties, especially the southwestern approaches. This weather front still pushing northwards, taking its rain with it, and it's going to be a blustery day generally. Temperatures 6 in the north to 10 or 11 as we sweep down towards the south. Then as we head towards the end of the week and of course the Easter weekend, it's going to remain unsettled. There'll be showers at times, won't be a washout, and temperatures rising a little bit.
The future is already here.
All about AI changing our jobs.
From gadgets to gaming.
May the best driver win. It won't be me.
Sustainability to AI.
Giant nets and AI robots to deal with plastic pollution.
The latest developments from the world of tech.
A floating solar farm, and it's a pretty impressive sight.
Wow! That went right through me!
Click. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
I want to talk to you about the politics of this. Did she not think she was going to get that question?
It's important to remember that this is a negotiation.
It's a good photo op.
I have an opportunity to create chaos.
There is always an email. We are so insignificant in this cosmos. Do you want some facts on baguettes? I'm just feeding you the stories. Maybe this is The Context.
The Context, weeknights from 8 p.m. on BBC News and iPlayer.
The world of film is changing faster and faster all the time. Our global Talking Movies team brings you up to date on the latest in movie making from around the world.
Stories from other cultures.
Interviewing top filmmakers and stars.
I didn't think I'd ever seen anything like that on screen.
From blockbusters to art house cinema, we'll spotlight the brilliant and unique voices bringing their stories to the big screen.
Talking Movies. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
This is BBC News. I'm Samantha Simmonds. The headlines. 4 gunmen accused of carrying out the Moscow concert hall attack are charged with terrorism. Intense fighting is reported around 3 hospitals in Gaza. Aid agencies say dozens of doctors and patients are displaced or detained. The UK Home Office launches a new international campaign to deter migrants from crossing the English Channel in small boats. And the British Parliament is set to be briefed on threats posed by China, which is believed to be behind a wave of cyber attacks. Let's return to our top story. 4 men suspected of carrying out an attack on a music hall in Moscow, in which 137 people were killed, have appeared in court charged with terrorism. Footage released by the court shows the men being marched into the room, handcuffed and blindfolded. All appeared injured. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for the attack, but Russian officials have stated without evidence that there was Ukrainian involvement. Kyiv says the claim is absurd.
Well, there are a number of reasons. One is Syria. So IS have in the past put out statements, and quite recently, saying we will never forgive and forget, because in Syria, Russian Air Force and Russian forces are fighting ISIS, Islamic State, as are the Americans. Secondly, there's Afghanistan, where the Taliban are fighting ISK, which is the Khorasan Wilaya, that's the province of, or the branch of ISIS that operates in Afghanistan in that area. And back in September 2022, ISIS attacked the Russian embassy in Kabul. So they consider that the Russian government is an ally of the Taliban and the Taliban is their enemy. And also there are a number of disputes that they've got with regimes in that part of the world. The third reason, I think, which is perhaps the most pressing, is that there's recently been quite a crackdown, a clampdown by the FSB, that's Russia's domestic security agency, against suspected jihadists inside Russia. Of course, Russia is at war with Ukraine. Sorry, it's a special military operation. That's what it's officially called in Russia. Yes. But, it's a war by any other name. And that's really where the Kremlin's attention has been. So I think there is a legitimate question to be asked as to whether Russia took its eye off the ball here with this.
Frank Gardner, our security correspondent there. Now to the Middle East. Aid groups say they are witnessing an unimaginable situation in a hospital in Gaza, where large open wounds have been left untreated. The hospital in Khan Yunis is one of the last medical facilities still functioning in Gaza. It comes as the head of the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees says Israel has told him it will no longer approve its food convoys to enter northern Gaza. In a post on social media, UNRWA's head Philippe Lazzarini described the move as outrageous. He said Israel's decision meant many more people would die of hunger, dehydration and lack of shelter. There's been no word from Israel. It comes as the country's defence minister Yoav Gallant is due in Washington with the Israeli leadership under increasing pressure from the US to halt its planned assault on Rafah in southern Gaza. We've been hearing from Hani Al-Madoun from UNRWA USA. He told us that more food deliveries into Gaza are desperately needed.
We're talking about dire situation where literally people are starved. My sister visited a Kamal Adwan hospital today and she met with a kid named Fadi. He's on the brink of dying because of malnutrition. These are real people. These are our neighbors. And unfortunately, we see UNRWA being under siege, essentially, and they're not able to deliver aid in Gaza. So it's tying our hands during these circumstances that are dire unfathomable, and then, you know, what can we do? We're trying to do and help and fundraise, but, you know, there are miles of aid outside of Gaza waiting to be allowed in. For some reason, due to the lack of the political will, we're not getting that anywhere near delivery for people who need it.
The captain of a Royal Navy warship in the Red Sea has told the BBC that the attacks are becoming more deadly, with the Houthis in Yemen launching more ballistic and cruise missiles which are harder to defend against. The Houthis say they are targeting merchant vessels and warships in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale is the first journalist to join the destroyer HMS Diamond while facing the threats in the Red Sea.
Security, security, security.
This is Coalition Warship, listening Channel 16.
The Royal Navy's HMS Diamond, sailing in the Red Sea towards danger. They're here to protect merchant shipping, and for this mission to escort a naval task group. And they're armed and ready.
This task group has now entered the high threat area, and as you can see, they're preparing to run the gauntlet with the Houthis.
In the operations room, the ship's nerve centre, they've already donned fire protective clothing. With their powerful radar, they can track multiple objects from hundreds of miles away. And this is what happens when they identify a threat.
Fireball 293 at 165 knots of word.
The drills they've rehearsed many times before.
Air threats warning, red. Air threat warning, red. Missile inbound to the ship. Starboard quarter. Time to go, 2 minutes.
But now it's deadly serious. This, one of two occasions we witnessed when the Houthis fire ballistic missiles, travelling at more than 3 times the speed of sound.
Assess the missile has splashed in the water north of the task group. Therefore, air threat warning now yellow, air threat warning now yellow.
Between the time it's fired and by the time it impacts, you've got about 2 minutes to react. That's why we're in state 2, that's why we're wearing our clothing all the time, so that within that time frame, we'll be in absolutely the right posture to be able to deal with those. But yeah, it can feel a bit intense, obviously, someone's trying to potentially shoot something at you.
Houthi drones are the other danger.
That's UAV on bearing 350 range.
And he's now got 2 airborne in the north. Obviously, you know, our position now, we anticipate they may come south.
Air threat warning is white weapons.
It's a potentially deadly version of hide and seek, but the drone doesn't spot them. This time, Diamond hasn't fired its main Sea Viper missiles, but it's already shot down 9 drones, 7 of them in just one night in January.
And that sort of red.
Diamond's captain believes they have saved lives, but they haven't stopped increasingly sophisticated Houthi attacks.
It seems to me that they're using more advanced and more lethal weapons than they were in the earlier parts of the operation.
And where are they getting those from?
I couldn't tell you that, I'm afraid. I guess they're smuggling from somewhere, but I'd be speculating.
But Diamond is looking out for suspicious activity. They board a dhow. It's declared stateless, but it's flying an Iranian flag. The search finds nothing illegal. It's proving just as hard to stem the flow of weapons as to stop the Houthi attacks. Jonathan Beale, BBC News on HMS Diamond.
The UK's Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden is to brief MPs today on the cyber threat from China. He's expected to tell Parliament that China is behind a wave of cyber attacks against MPs and peers. A number who have been critical of Beijing are thought to have been targeted. The BBC understands other Western nations will set out similar concerns. Our chief political correspondent Henry Zeffman said the UK's Deputy Prime Minister will be speaking in the coming hours. He told us more about it.
I think he's got 2 audiences. In the House of Commons, he'll be addressing MPs. But I think really this is the UK government addressing Beijing. From what we know so far, there's going to be broadly 2 areas that he's going to address. One is going to be about a specific cyber attack on an institution, the Electoral Commission, our elections regulator here in the UK. They announced last year that they had faced a cyber attack back in 2021 and 2022, but they didn't name a culprit. It sounds like Oliver Dowden is going to say that the cyber attackers had links to Beijing. And then the second thing that Oliver Dowden is going to talk about is threats to MPs directly. 3 MPs, all of them real skeptics of China, have been called to a briefing from Parliament's Security Department. We think that's going to focus on specific threats, cyber threats that they've faced. So altogether, I think a fairly firm statement of concern from the UK government about malign activity from China.
And we'll, of course, bring you more on that throughout the day. Staying with China, Hong Kong's controversial new security law came into effect over the weekend. Critics have said Article 23 could undermine the city's status as an international financial hub. Beijing says the legislation will protect national interests and allow Hong Kong to focus on economic development. Our business reporter Zhao de Silva has more.
Article 23 looks to be the latest headwind to land in Hong Kong after pro-democracy protests in 2019, then the pandemic and strict lockdowns which grounded the economy to a halt. Many international businesses have moved out and set up regional headquarters elsewhere in Asia. Housing prices, once among the most expensive in the world, have plunged 20% since their 2021 peak. Hong Kong's crown jewel, the Hang Seng Index, today trades at roughly half its value before the 2019 protests. And for the first time since the Economic Freedom of the World Index started more than 50 years ago, the city has lost its spot at the top of the ranking. Now, there's concern that vague provisions in Hong Kong's new national security law around state secrets and links to foreign entities could have a further chilling effect on many global businesses in the financial hub. The warning from one Washington, D.C.-based political risk consultant with financial sector clients: be cautious.
My advice to my clients would be to play it very safe, to potentially consider doing such work outside of Hong Kong rather than risk the vagueness of the law coming back to bite them.
In Hong Kong, Alan Zeman is a prominent figure in the business community. He believes authorities will prioritize protecting the community.
You know, the most important thing about it is that you have to have criminal intent to do something. And it really applies to a very small minority of people. And most of those that were troublemakers have already left Hong Kong.
The losses appear to be stacking up for Hong Kong as a global financial hub. And businesses in the city are closely monitoring the potential side effects of Article 23.
Zhao de Silva there. An urgent review into the Crown Prosecution Service's handling of the Nottingham attacks case is expected to be published today. Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates were killed by Valdo Calacane last June, but the CPS's decision to accept his guilty plea of manslaughter as opposed to prosecuting him for murder caused outrage among the victims' families. Louisa Pilbeam has the story.
Ian Coates, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar were stabbed to death in violent attacks in Nottingham. Their families were expecting their killer to be tried for murder.
When we went to Nottingham the day after Barney had been murdered, and the very first person we saw was the Chief Constable, and her first words to us were, "Don't worry, we've got him, he's going down." And I think I foolishly took it verbatim that the criminal justice system would do the right thing.
Valdo Calacane was initially charged with 3 counts of murder and the attempted murder of 3 others. Shown here being arrested by police, Calacane was assessed by 5 psychiatrists who agreed his severe mental illness meant he had a partial defence of diminished responsibility. The Crown Prosecution Service accepted that plea. He was instead charged with 3 counts of manslaughter alongside 3 counts of attempted murder. But the families say they were not consulted. An urgent, independent inspection was launched into how the CPS handled the case. 19-year-old Grace's father believes the CPS failed them.
All of the families felt utterly let down. Technically, he could have killed tens of people that day in Nottingham. If you can't get someone like him a life tariff, then I can't understand in the country who deserves a life tariff.
Speaking alongside the other victims' families outside court in January, after Calacane was sentenced, caretaker Ian Coates' son expressed his frustrations.
This man is a killer. Murder was the only thing he cared about, and he fulfilled this in horrific fashion.
The Crown Prosecution Service told the BBC, "We are fully engaging with the review." The findings of this review will be announced today and are expected to clarify whether or not the CPS made the right decisions and fulfilled its duty to the families devastated by these attacks. Louisa Pilbeam, BBC News.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Junior doctors in Wales have started a 96-hour walkout as part of an ongoing pay dispute with the Welsh Government. BMA Cymru say they were left with no choice but to strike after the Welsh Government failed to produce a credible offer to end the dispute. The Welsh Government said it did not have the funds to improve its 5% pay offer, which junior doctors have rejected. Protests outside schools should be banned, according to a review by a senior government advisor. Dame Sarah Khan has made the recommendation after examining the handling of demonstrations outside Batley Grammar School in West Yorkshire in 2021. They began when pupils were shown an offensive cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad. She says children need to be protected.
One of the recommendations I've made to the government is that there should be an exclusion zone or a buffer zone outside schools to protect children. If it's the case, for example, that teachers want to go on picket because of industrial action, for example, that should be acceptable. And there'll be other reasons that where some types of protests will be acceptable. But these types of intimidatory and threatening protests should be banned, just in the same way that there are exclusion zones outside abortion clinics.
The Children's Commissioner for England is calling on politicians to put the ambitions of young people at the heart of their election manifestos. Dame Rachel de Souza will publish the findings of a survey of children's views today. It suggests only 1 in 5 children believe that adults in power are listening to them. Sir David Attenborough has described it as his favourite place to see nature in the UK. The Farne Islands off the coast of Northumberland typically attract around 45,000 visitors a year. But Inner Farne, the largest of the islands, has been shut to visitors for almost 2 years after an outbreak of avian flu killed more than 10,000 birds. Today, it reopens. Alison Freeman has this report.
Rugged and remote, the Farne Islands are a haven for hundreds of thousands of seabirds. And every breeding season, it's not just birds who flock here. People keen to see the 23 different species, including puffins, make their way across by boat from sea houses. But 2 years ago, visits to the islands were stopped after an outbreak of bird flu killed a total of 9,000 birds. Looking back, National Trust wardens explained what a difficult time it was.
They'd have to deal with that number of carcasses at the time. It was over 6,000 dead birds in 2022. So you can be prepared for it, but it is quite upsetting.
So this has been as close as people could get for the past few years, sailing around but not going on to the islands.
Mind the gap, everyone, all right?
But from today, Inner Farne will finally reopen to visitors. The National Trust saying there's far less avian flu, with the number of birds affected halved. The relief felt by the businesses on shore, who rely on the enthusiasts the birds bring, was clear when the reopening was announced last month.
You don't get any photographers because they just want the picture of the puffin with the sand eels on the bill, you know. So if you can't get that kind of picture, you know, and they don't want to be up and down on a boat sometimes, so you need to be islands to be open. So fingers crossed, it's all good for everybody. The B&Bs and the hotels, so this will just help them as well, because people get wind of this being back open again and they think, oh right, well we'll definitely go now.
Visitor numbers will be limited at first, but the reopening is a significant moment for one of Northumberland's most beautiful destinations and an internationally important habitat for wildlife. Alison Freeman, BBC News.
Now to the story of Jasmine Paris from Scotland, the first woman to complete one of the world's most gruelling races, the Barkley Marathons in Tennessee. It's 160 kilometres up and down hills through rugged terrain. She finished with just 99 seconds to spare. Jasmine finally recovered her breath and spoke to the BBC.
It wasn't until the last kilometre that I really sort of doubted that it was going to be possible. And at that point, I was just so desperate to stop and to start running and to walk. And I knew that I couldn't because I wouldn't make it. I think it was just the thought that if I didn't make it this time, it was going to be by seconds, and then I would have to come back and do the whole thing again, because I would never have let it rest. I was so oxygen deficient when I reached the end. And the last few sort of 100 metres, I couldn't even really see anybody. I knew that there were people kind of cheering me on, and there was lots of noise, and but I was just aiming for the gate, and everything else sort of went blurry at the edges of my vision, and I just needed to make it to the gate, at which point I sort of collapsed down in a gasping kind of heap on the ground. So I did it for me, and I'm super happy that I achieved what I set out to do. Everyone. See you in a bit. Go. And I'm really glad that I kind of did it for women worldwide as well, not just runners, but maybe any woman that wants to take on a challenge, and especially all the young girls. You know how hard it is to keep young girls in sport. This year there was a new section of the course which involved a lot of brambles, really thick ones that kind of slashed your legs.
You're watching BBC News. Now, Sheridan Smith is one of the UK's most well-known actresses, winning awards for her TV and stage work in a career that spanned more than 2 decades. Now she's back on the West End, starring as an alcoholic Broadway legend struggling with her mental health. Our culture reporter Charlotte Gallagher spoke to her about the challenges of her latest role.
Action.
Sheridan Smith is back in the West End, in a role she's described herself as being close to the bone.
It's about this character, Myrtle, who is a Broadway actress, and she's kind of clinging on to life by her fingernails, and you don't know if she's going to make opening night. But it's just such a buzz. It's like, I've never done anything like this before, so I'm really kind of pushing myself to the limit, physically and mentally on this, but it's worth it.
One said to me, cool. Down. Don't act a fool. Down. I always had a fool. I ain't nothing new. Now.
She's experienced the highs of fame, starring in shows like Gavin and Stacey.
Sheridan Smith, Mrs. Big.
And winning a BAFTA award. But also the lows. In 2016, she temporarily pulled out of the musical Funny Girl because of stress, exhaustion and grief about her father's cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, when they tell you that you can't.
I read that when you first got the script, you talk about how it's dark and it's a challenge. You thought, is this about me?
There's so many parts of the character that I relate to in that way. I've been in my own mental crisis before, which was quite well publicised, so there's definitely parts of myself I can bring to the character. And it's a wonderful role, like she's vulnerable, strong, but all over the place. And you kind of, the whole point of the story is that you never know if she's going to be okay. I had a wobble, covered myself in tattoos and had that moment, which actually I'm allowed to have my tattoos in this for the first job ever. But yeah, I lost a lot of confidence around that time. But it's come back, thankfully, due to friends and supportive people and being given opportunities like this again. I'm very grateful, because that's the one thing that the public always kind of stood by me, even though whatever went on in the press and what was reported, they understood that, you know, when you're grieving, you can't really explain what you go through. And people were stopping me and cuddling me on the street.
Part of Sheridan's new show involves her leaving the theatre and acting on the street. collapsing outside the stage door. The scene is shown to the audience inside on big screens.
We get a lot of people, you know, crowding around to watch that scene every night. I mean, I would love people to get involved because it adds to it all, you know. It's so exciting, and then if people kind of come and help me, or if people are passing, it makes it all just so live and real, and you know, that's never done in the theatre. So it's such an exciting element of the musical.
And have you got a coach load of people coming from home?
Probably. I mean, on Legally Blonde, my whole village came, and they all used to come in pink cowboy hats. This isn't that show.
What is this feeling that's haunting me at all times?
Sheridan has been acting professionally since she was a teenager, leaving her home near Doncaster and moving to London.
I am very proud working class. My dad was from Barnsley, proper Yorkshireman. So I am very proud of where I've come from, but I have been very lucky, you know, like when I moved to London when I was 16, I did actually in the theatre next door, I played Tallulah, and I stayed down since I was 16, so I've been one of the lucky ones, but it is quite hard, I think, for it's getting better, I think, that working class kids are being able to get into drama schools and things like that, but yeah, I'm very proud of my roots and being a northerner like you.
Sheridan became a mum in 2020, so could her son be following in her footsteps?
He sees me on telly, like he sees me in interviews, and he came to the theatre, he's been in my dressing room and seen the picture, and he goes, Mama. But yeah, this isn't Shirley Valentine, this isn't a light, fun show, so I don't think he'll be watching this one. But he came on stage with me when I did Shirley Valentine in the Bows, and he was loving it, he was waving to the crowd. But he's had my pride and joy, he's the reason I do it all. And yeah, very proud to have him.
When he was doing the Bows, though, did that worry you and think, oh my God, he's going to be wanting to act straight away?
I did think that. I thought, oh no, he's got it. There's something in him. He was loving it all.
Charlotte Gallagher, BBC News.
Talking to Sheridan Smith there. Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Carol.
Hello again. The weather this week is certainly going to be changeable. We'll often have windy conditions. We'll see spells of rain. And tonight in particular, we're looking at some significant snow on the Scottish hills, which could lead to some disruption on some of the higher routes. So in terms of the rainfall, you can see here how much we're expecting in the next 5 days. The lighter greens, the key here, up to 80 millimetres of rainfall is possible in parts of southwest England. And what we have at the moment is this band of rain pushing northwards, bumping into the cold air in Scotland, so some snow on the hills, and then this next weather front bringing in some further rain later. In between, quite a lot of cloud around with a scattering of snow showers in the north. Here we've got temperatures of 5 to 7. Come further south, we're looking at 10 to 12 and breezy through the Irish Sea. So this is our weather front moving northwards as we go through the evening and overnight. Some persistent rain with it, but on higher ground we'll also see that significant snowfall. In fact, above 300 metres or so, we could have 10 to 20 centimetres of snow. At lower levels, it's more likely to be rain and sleet. That's at sea level. So as we go through the course of this evening and overnight, we've got our weather front producing the rain and the snow. Come south, we've got our other weather front producing some rain. We'll see some clear spells, but there will be quite a bit of cloud around. So for England, Wales and Northern Ireland, our overnight lows between 5 and 7. Colder in Scotland with temperatures closer to freezing or just below. Tomorrow, a lot of that snow will eventually start to peter out. It's going to be windy in the north. There'll be quite a bit of dry weather, but our weather front still slowly pushing northeastwards through the course of the day. Temperatures 5 to 11 degrees. And then as we head on into Wednesday, another area of low pressure comes in from the Atlantic. Windy across southern counties, especially the southwestern approaches. This weather front still pushing northwards, taking its rain with it, and it's going to be a blustery day generally. Temperatures 6 in the north to 10 or 11 as we sweep down towards the south. Then as we head towards the end of the week and of course the Easter weekend, it's going to remain unsettled. There'll be showers at times, won't be a washout, and temperatures rising a little bit.
Ready for a lively debate? Sometimes our panelists agree, and sometimes they don't. There's people with a lot to say, and others who just say enough. Some who want to ask the hard questions, some who want to avoid them, and some who think they have the answers. They're guaranteed to keep you entertained, whether you agree or not. Politics Live, today at 12:15 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
I'm telling you, there's going to be a revolution.
Have you considered resigning over this? Because you're clearly embarrassed.
Of course, I have been, I have thought about this.
I want to be totally honest with you, and I am being honest with you.
At least this should be a common ground for everyone. We should defend international law.
In the spirit of your title of Hard Talk, you're completely wrong.
I'm not offended, but I want to hear why.
You're completely wrong.
Hard Talk. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Live from London, this is BBC News. 4 gunmen accused of carrying out the Moscow concert hall attack are charged with terrorism. Intense fighting is reported around 3 hospitals in Gaza. Aid agencies say dozens of doctors and patients are displaced or detained. The British Parliament is set to be briefed on threats posed by China, which is believed to be behind a wave of cyber attacks.
Congratulations, Kim. You deserve it.
And American comedian Kevin Hart is honoured for a Lifetime Achievement Award in comedy. Hello and welcome, I'm Samantha Simmonds. We begin in Russia, where authorities have charged 4 men, it says, attacked a Moscow concert hall and killed at least 137 people. 3 of them were marched bent double into a Moscow court, while the 4th was in a wheelchair. The Kremlin has refused to comment on reports that the suspects were tortured. All 4 were charged with committing an act of terrorism. They've been ordered into custody pending a trial in May. Media reports have named all 4 men, saying they are nationals of Tajikistan. 3 have reportedly pleaded guilty. These live pictures show the tributes to the victims placed outside the concert hall. The Islamic State group says it carried out the attack and it has uploaded graphic videos of it online. The Kremlin has said it is not appropriate to comment on this claim. Anna Aslam reports.
Handcuffed and blindfolded, 4 suspected gunmen were brought into court. They all appeared injured. One man arrived in a wheelchair and sat in the dock with his eyes closed throughout the proceedings. All were charged with committing an act of terrorism. The 4 men are reportedly Tajikistan nationals. Russia says they were caught fleeing to Ukraine and had contacts there. Kyiv fiercely denies any link to the attack. The Islamic State group says it was behind the shooting. This is how the attack had begun, with gunmen in the foyer and desperate attempts to take cover. The attackers moved on to the auditorium. By the end of this, more than 130 people were dead. Across Russia, flags flew at half-mast for the victims of the concert hall attack. And at the scene of the attack, Crocus City Hall, the crowds grew longer on a national day of mourning, an outpouring of sympathy, a mountain of tributes to the dead. As President Putin lit a candle for the victims, Russia will be praying there will be no more attacks. Anna Aslam, BBC News.
Earlier I spoke to our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. I started by asking him what happened in the court appearance and what we know about these men.
It was a late night court appearance yesterday, and the 4 men were brought in. They were charged with an act of terrorism. They were remanded in custody for 2 months. They are reported to be citizens of the Central Asian Republic of Tajikistan, that's according to the Russian TASS agency. From their appearance, it looked as if they'd been beaten. black eyes, swollen face. One of the men was brought into the courtroom in a wheelchair, in a hospital gown, and at one point looked as if he was going to lose consciousness. As for the casualty figures, the latest, 137 people were killed in that brutal attack on the concert hall on Friday, but officials are warning that may not be the final death toll. The figures could rise.
And Steve, what more about the government response? Initially, Vladimir Putin came out very quickly to blame Ukraine, despite Islamic State claiming responsibility. And what's the latest from the government?
Well, Russian officials and the pro-Kremlin media continue to promote the notion that in some way, somehow, Ukraine was behind this. Yes, Vladimir Putin suggested that in his TV address at the weekend. I'll tell you, there's some extraordinary commentary in the pro-Kremlin newspapers this morning. One of them says, there are plenty of reasons for thinking Kiev did this. There are basic truths. Fire burns, wind blows. The Kiev regime are murderers and terrorists, presenting no evidence at all, but coming out with something like that. And another paper, Komsomolskaya Pravda, quotes a Russian MP as saying the best